Hey everyone, I'm Melanie with Streamlined Legal, where we help law firms get the most out of their practice management software. So I'm going to give everybody just a couple minutes here or half a minute to join in, and we'll get started very shortly. So thanks everyone for joining us today. Again, I'm Melanie Leonard with Streamline Legal, and we help law firms get the most out of their practice management software. Today, I wanted to make sure to do this webinar. It's a topic that I am so passionate about, and I'll tell you in a few minutes why, but it's definitely something that I think cannot be said enough and cannot be emphasized enough. The fact that there are a lot of people out there with practice management software and they are not taking full advantage of it. They're not using all the features and they're not getting all of the benefits from it. And so it's definitely something, like I said, I'm passionate about, and I'm super excited to be here talking to you about it today. There are three main areas that we're going to cover today. And the first one is being your calendar and how you're utilizing the calendar in your practice management software. The second one is going to cover tasks and how you're using tasks or workflows to monitor not only the work that you're doing, but also the work that your staff is doing. And then the third one is going to be just practice management in general and managing your caseload and monitoring the different types of cases that you have. So those are the three topics that we're going to cover. We're going to get a lot really into detail as to why this is a benefit to you and what kind of things you can be doing in these areas to get the most out of your software. And of course, the end goal being to save you time, to save you money, whether you're trying to grow a practice or whether you're trying to maintain or sustain a practice. Either one of those, the time and money is going to benefit you. So, absolutely, I want to make sure that you stick around till the end because we are going to offer up something that I think will be really valuable to you guys once you have a chance to view all this content and get to know us a little bit better. So I want to start just by telling you, most of you I've not met, I've not gone into detail about my story. So I want to tell you a little bit about why I'm so passionate about this topic and why it matters to me and why I think it should matter to you as well. So I am an attorney. I am licensed in Illinois and started my own practice a couple years out of law school. And what happened was, as soon as I graduated law school, I started working in some other firms in Chicago, some older firms, some newer firms, and had some experiences that were really eye-opening to me. I think maybe I had been tainted by TV shows that were talking about what a law firm should look like. But I was seeing things like offices that just had papers piled everywhere, like quite literally you couldn't walk through them. I was seeing attorneys just stressed out and burnt out no matter how long they had been practicing, frankly. And these are the kind of things that had concerned me. And so after a couple of years of working at firms that were very technologically advanced at the time and others that weren't so tech advanced, I decided to go out and start my own practice. And so for me, it was a situation where I felt like it could be done better. I always felt like I could find a better way to do things. And so when I was working in these other firms and I would come up with ideas, sometimes we would implement them, sometimes they weren't greeted with such enthusiasm. So it gave me the opportunity to say, okay, I'm going to take a step back here. I think this can be done in a better way, and I want to give that a try. And so that's what prompted me to go ahead and start my own firm. Now, of course, you guys, most of you have started your own firms, so you know exactly the situation I'm talking about, where there was so much to juggle. There still is so much to juggle between the marketing and the sales and the servicing the clients and monitoring the people that were helping me, whether I had staff on site or staff off site. So it was a lot to keep up with. And then, inevitably there came the situation where we started having kids, and you had to keep up with the kids and keeping up with the practice and the kids and the family, and it's just a lot to juggle. And so I've been there, I've been in your situation. I've had the experience of trying to run a practice with a lot of employees, with a few employees, depending on the year, and it can be overwhelming. And so for me, I started looking for tools that I thought would help. And so that's when I started looking at things like practice management software. And this was a time when practice management software, it had been around for a while as far as on your hard drive or on your servers, but the products that were just coming out at that time were things like Rocket Matter and Clio and all the web-based practice management software. And of course, this was a huge beginning because this allowed attorneys that maybe couldn't afford this technology or this software before to be able to use these things in their practice intimately. And so I, as a first year out on my own, I invested right away in practice management software. At the time, I got Time Matters, which was run off of a server or hard drive at the time. That lasted for about 8 or 9 months, and then I switched over to Clio. I've tried a bunch since, but Clio is definitely one of my favorites. And, it has a lot of the benefits that others now are doing as well. So for example, we've got, Practice Panther, we've got My Case, all these other software that are in the cloud or online definitely was something that was new at the time, but absolutely changed the way that I practice law. And I know that's a huge statement, but it's absolutely true because before having that cloud-based practice management software, I was really stuck. I was stuck in my office. I was stuck with the ideas in my head. I was stuck without being able to get a lot of extra help because I wasn't able to communicate or get the information out quick enough for people to help me fast enough. I was doing residential real estate in the Chicago suburbs. It moves very fast. Most of my clients were only clients for 30 days. And so that really teaches you the value of efficiency and the necessity for having systems in place. And so I started using Clio. I started just going all in. I would use it first just for notes or first just for keeping phone numbers. And then I'd add in another feature. And then after a couple of years, we were absolutely taking full advantage of all of Clio's features. And it took me from a place where I felt like, first, I felt like I was always on the defense. People would be calling, wanting updates, wanting information that I hadn't gotten to or hadn't done yet. And so I was always feeling behind and always trying to play catch up. But then once I instituted, especially that task management feature that we'll talk about in a few minutes, but when I instituted more of the features of Clio, I was able then to become more offensive. And I was able to be able to anticipate my clients' needs. Those are the real estate agents we were working with. And so we were able to not have that sense of always being behind. Now we were the ones reaching out to other people and saying, hey, have you done this yet? Can we do this? What's the next step? And so absolutely, instead of being a stressed out, overwhelmed mess, which I had been for a number of years prior to implementing this technology, it really turned us into a more proactive, more action-oriented firm that was able to serve our clients very well, and more importantly, be able to serve myself and our staff very well too, because now they had the tools that would enable them to benefit and be able to keep up with the demands of the practice area that we were working in. So whether you're practicing in residential real estate as I was or any other practice area, you know the time frame that your cases take. And by this point, you probably have a pretty good idea of how those cases are going to play out, generally speaking. And so that's all institutional knowledge, as we call it, that can be put into a practice management system and shared with other team members so that you're all getting the benefit of that and you're not all struggling, and it becomes a much, much more enjoyable workplace, I have to say. And so having that experience of making that change within my own firm really made me passionate about wanting to have other attorneys benefit from that. And so I'd go to closings and I'd start talking to the attorney across the table, you know, how do you do things? What are you doing? And they would share with me. We'd start talking about things. And inevitably it came to a point where I just loved helping other attorneys so much in this particular area that, you know, they would start coming to me, and it became pretty overwhelming to run both real estate practice and helping people with their practice management software. And so I sold that firm, ended up making that decision about 1.5 years ago to start this business. And it's been awesome ever since. I've had the great opportunity to work with tons of firms that are looking to grow, looking to expand, or frankly, just looking for a better quality of life. And so that's what brought me to this software. And I hope that those are the same benefits that are going to, that you're going to be able to get out of the software as well. In fact, I'm confident of it. And so I want to mention that a lot of the screenshots and screen sharing that I'll be doing today will be showing you Clio, just because I do have the most practice data in there. However, please keep in mind that whether you're using Clio or Amicus or MyCase, most of these features are available across all those platforms. And so although the screenshots may show Clio today, these are things that you can accomplish most likely using your practice management software that you have now. And if you can't, it may be time to consider whether or not that's the best practice management software for you. So please feel free to reach out if you have any questions about the particular software. So, much like promised, I want to dive right in and start talking about 3 of the strongest features that I think that can really change the way that you're practicing law and using that practice management software. So hopefully by now you all got the system scorecard that I sent out. If you haven't received it, please feel free to reach out. I'm happy to email it out to you. But that's a really good beginner test to see how much of these features you're taking advantage of already, or what things you're already doing, and where you could use some help. So please feel free to complete that scorecard, share your thoughts with us, your scores with us. We're always excited to hear about things that other people are doing that we might be able to learn from, and where you might be able to use some help. And so, and speaking of help, I wanted to just put in a plug real quick for our Facebook page. I do approximately 2 to 3 videos, Facebook videos a week, dealing with different practice management features, different business building techniques. So please do check us out on Facebook, because those are very valuable as well, and of course no cost to those. So they can really point you in the right direction and get you going on some of these features that you've been thinking about for some time but haven't actually stepped into. So do check that out on Facebook. So first up is calendar. Now, I remember my own situation when I was practicing and trying to find calendaring options that would work for more than just me, obviously for a team, and you know, for our clients as well once we actually got into scheduling. And there are so many choices out there. There are some really great options, some not so great options. But the reality is that I found it so much easier to have that calendar located within the practice management software, because I could take advantage of the connections that I could make. So for example, when creating an event on the calendar in my practice management software, I could then go ahead and use that to very quickly create a time entry, or very quickly look at all my events on that same case in one fell swoop, in one list. And so I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here so that I can just give you an example of that. And like we talked about, we do have Clio up here on the screen just as an example. Again, most practice management software does include calendaring capabilities. So once I was able to integrate the practice management software, it made things the calendar in the practice management software, it made things a lot easier. Because here, I'll give you an example of, you know, I'm going to create a new event, and it's going to be an initial. Why is it that when you type in front of people, it always takes longer? And there's more typos. Our initial consultation is going to be tomorrow at 1:30, and it's in my office. And the location is ultra important, by the way. We'll get to that in just a second here. But here's the key, is I'm going to go ahead and associate this with an actual case or matter in my practice management software. And I can put in whatever details I want, like don't forget to look at the initial phone notes saved in Clio to remind myself. So I create that event, it shows up on my calendar, but here's the nice thing is now I know what case this is on. And if I click on that actual case or matter in the software, I can then go over to the calendar and see a list of all my appointments for this case. Obviously, we only have one so far, but they would be listed here if there were more. So that makes it super nice for me not to have to search through, when was the last time this client came in? When was the last time that we had a hearing on this matter? When was the last time, we've got basically a bit of a timeline here of all the events. Now, I highly recommend that you schedule your phone calls, and so those could show up on here as well, in addition to court cases, court matters, hearings, status calls, that kind of stuff. As well as any meetings that I have internally. If I have associates I'm working with or consultants I'm working with that I want to go ahead and specifically discuss this matter, I can make that an event on the calendar as well. So being able to view all of these in one place for one case is very, very helpful to keep me knowledgeable about what's going on. And keep in mind, I think about practice management software as our shared brain. It basically allows us to share a ton of information without actually saving it in our brain, because the practice management software has far more room and storage than our brains do. So to be able to have all of that right here that I can view at a glance is fantastic. So let me show you another situation that is very helpful in having this calendar here and being able to access it like this, is if I'm now trying to track my time for the day, then I can go ahead and just go to this appointment and very easily create a time entry. And again, Clio's not the only one that does this. But it already knows my appointment was half an hour long. It was on this case. Here's the description, what I put in the name of the appointment. So it's got 90% of the time entry right there. Obviously, I can adjust it if the appointment actually took longer than expected. But that's so much faster and easier. Now I'm just going to save that time entry. Then going through and remembering, okay, what did I do today? Okay, it's on my calendar, on my paper calendar. Now I've got to make a time entry in Clio. Being able to just click down the list of events that I have for today and be able to just create a time entry off of each of those really does save a lot of time. So the more time I have blocked or scheduled, then the easier it is to just go down the list and create those time entries. Now, of course, I may have additional time entries. I may have other things that I want to, add time for that wasn't necessarily time blocked, and that's okay. But it's a great place to start, so I'm not quite so overwhelmed with my time tracking. And so I would highly recommend that you do that. Now, let's talk a little bit about our Clio calendar or our practice management calendar, because the reality is we have other things going on in our lives, right? Or at least I hope we do. And so having things on the calendar for work is fantastic, but I also find some value in being able to see my calendar in addition to my work calendar, being able to see my personal events, as I call them. So whether it's taking my kids to school or taking them to an after school, rehearsal of some type or practice, those are things that I want to know as well. And so I would like to highly encourage you guys to think about using your practice management software for work-related things so that we can get those benefits we just talked about and share across with our staff, but also being able to sync those with other calendars. So for example, in my personal life, we use Google to keep track of, my husband's calendar. My kids each have their own calendar because they've all got their own events. And so being able to use Google to see my personal events, but then also being able to overlay that Clio calendar on top of it. So I have a separate Clio calendar, I have a separate Google calendar, and my Clio calendar can sync with Google so I can see those events on top of each other. And for me, that's very important because the reality is I'm not just a mom, I'm not just an attorney, and so looking at those two calendars separate isn't always going to do the trick. Being able to see those two calendars on top of each other and overlaid is very, very helpful when I'm taking into account all the things I need to do in a day or all the events that I need to be at or get accomplished. And so being able to use your practice management calendar specifically for the practice, but then having access to that in addition to your personal calendars is very, very helpful. Now, of course, there are all kinds of calendars that you can create within your practice management software. It doesn't just have to be one type of calendar. So definitely you can keep that in mind as you start to look at other things that you want to be putting on the calendar. But okay, so to summarize, I want to go ahead and for the calendar, we want to look at using your practice management calendar for the benefits of attaching an event to a case and being able to very easily create time entries. Those are two of the biggest benefits of using that practice management calendar. And then the bonus, of course, being if you want to try and connect that to your personal calendars or other calendars, assuming that your software allows, and many of them do. So I would like, let's do this real quick before we move on to tasks, which, as I mentioned earlier, was probably the biggest thing that changed the way I practice law. I do want to go ahead and just get a poll real quick of who actually uses practice management software. We've been talking a lot about the fact that, we see a huge benefit in this, but there are people out there obviously that aren't using it yet, and that's perfectly fine. I actually did a presentation this last week in Minnesota where I polled the audience, and although it was marketed as a tech boot camp, and some of you may have been there, but only about half of the room had practice management software. And so when polling them to find out why, it really wasn't a question of, do we see the benefit? Most people absolutely did. It was more a question of sometimes cost involved, sometimes training that was required. And so there's obviously a lot of things we have to take into consideration with practice management software. But I will say that the benefits that we're going to be discussing today, and I'll go ahead and wrap up that poll. I see most of you are using practice management software. The benefits of using it definitely are going to, in my opinion, outweigh I'll share these results here, outweigh the cost of either maintaining the software or getting the training. So definitely something I'd encourage you to look at if you don't have it. Okay, so we're going to move on now to, we're going to move on to tasks. Now, keep in mind different software call tasks different things. Sometimes they refer to them as workflows. Sometimes they refer to them as task lists. There are two main ways that I look at tasks. And number one is what I consider like a one-off task. So basically a one-off task is where I think, okay, I really need Karen to do this. And so I'll go ahead and create a task in our software assign it to Karen that says, please do this, write this letter, write this motion. And then as soon as Karen logs into the software, she'll see it pop up or be included in a list of things that she needs to do. And so it's a really fantastic way to communicate instead of another email, because we all know email boxes can be overwhelming. I don't know about you guys, but the last time that I would do this about once a year, and I had my practice for about 12 years. Once a year, I would go in and do an average of how many emails I was receiving a day. And so at the highest, it got to about 200 emails a day. And I don't know about you guys, but there's no way you can get through 200 emails a day and still try and manage your practice and service your clients. And so, you know, it's definitely something I would recommend you take a look at, because it's very possible you're just feeling overwhelmed and not really understanding the magnitude of what's going on. And so by taking stock in it and looking at, you know, how many emails did I get yesterday, just as an example, definitely something I would encourage you to do, because it really is telling. And then the next step, of course, being looking at those emails and deciding, you know, is this something that you personally need to deal with, or can someone else deal with it? So the point being that email can quickly become overwhelming. And so being able to have another or different way to communicate what work needs to be done, because the reality is email sometimes is work that needs to be done and sometimes it's not. And so being able to distinguish between the two so that you can prioritize between the two is very helpful. Even if you're just taking the email and copying it into a task, being able to track it somewhere other than your inbox is very helpful. Using your inbox, and it looks like I'm not the only one that's had this happen. You know, using your inbox as a task management system is not effective, because the flyer email that you get from Nordstrom's is not going to be something that you need to check off and actually address or do. So definitely, I would say having a practice management system aside from your email is going to be beneficial. So the one-off tasks, I'm just going to write a task up, say, hey, Karen, please, you know, draft this motion. Send it off to her. She sees it. She does it. Maybe I put a deadline in there. Maybe I get some kind of notification once it's done so that I know that it's done. That can be fantastic. So that's where I recommend that you start. And I know that at the beginning it's going to, and I know this because this is the way it felt for me. At the beginning it's going to feel a little silly, because you're going to start writing down things that you already know in your head that you have to do, or Karen already knows that she has to do these things. But when they're stuck in our head, there's no way to, it's very difficult to quantify it, because when it's stuck in our head, we tend to overestimate or underestimate the actual amount of things that there are, or the time that it's going to take. So once we start actually writing this out in a task and seeing it on our screen as to how many things we have to do or how much time we think it's going to take, it's going to be a lot more accurate once we start writing it out than just guessing it from our head. And so being able to see these things written out will become very helpful, because you'll start to distinguish between what are the things that I, as the licensed attorney, need to actually do, and what are the things that I can delegate down. Because running a law firm with the licensed attorney creating, mailing out the bills and stamping the bills and sending the letters, taking them to the post office, these are things that are not going to be financially advantageous to you. You will be losing money by sending your own bills out and by stamping your own envelopes and printing your own letters, things like that. So until you see those spelled out, it is very hard to estimate in your head how much you have or how much time you have. So once you have them spelled out, we can now, and in fact, let me share my screen here so that I can show you an example of this. We're going to start by looking at our task list here. And similar to most of you, I'm guessing, my tasks are overdue. I've got a fair number of overdue tasks. But as it's spelled out here, I can now go in and say, okay, this is not something that I have to do. This is something that Karen's very capable of. So I'm going to go ahead and reassign it to her. And I'm going to go ahead and give that task to her. And I'm just going to work down my list. And if there's something that requires a license or something that only I can do for some reason, then of course I'm going to keep that on my list. But if there's something on here that an associate attorney can do, or a contract attorney, somebody else can do it to give me a higher return on investment, then I'm definitely going to go ahead and reassign those things to them. Now, this brings up a great point that these systems work the best when everybody that is doing work is on the system. So if you have people in your office helping you or doing work that do not have a Clio license or do not have a practice management license, it's going to make things that much more difficult. It's going to be a lot harder to determine who's supposed to do what. I have a lot of firms that will share licenses, and they'll take these tasks and they'll go ahead and edit them to put in, Eddie's name, because Eddie's the one that's going to do it. Because maybe we have, 2 client relations specialists. And so that one's for Eddie, and then this one's for Susan. But keep in mind now, when Eddie and Susan log in, they're now having to scan to see which tasks are theirs and which tasks aren't, which makes things a lot more complicated, especially when I'm trying to monitor the work that Eddie and Susan are doing. When I'm trying to supervise that work, then I now have to sort amongst which one's for Eddie, which one's for Susan, who's keeping up with their tasks, who's not keeping up with their tasks. So it becomes a lot more complicated and harder to track things when people are sharing licenses. So keep that in mind. And it's not just so that we can sell more practice management licenses. It is definitely due to the fact that it was designed specifically for each person to have a license so that we can distinguish between what each person is doing. And so sharing licenses does that make that more difficult. Now, I understand if you're a solo practitioner and you don't have the finances to be able to do this, you aren't capable. I get it. It's a challenge, right? But as soon as financially possible, the minute you're able to get another license, I think it will definitely pay off. So we have our tasks. We're working with one-off tasks. As I give Susan something to do, she's now checking that off when she completes it. I'm being notified. I can keep track of what Susan's doing. A lot of times, and you may have seen this in our system scorecard, a lot of times an attorney will assign things to other people and leave it to them to track what they're supposed to be working on and what they've been assigned. And while that's, of course, a great skill for them to develop and to have, it doesn't help me as the assigning attorney to not remember what I gave them. Because if they forgot and I forgot, then it's just gone. Until, of course, this is what typically happens, of course, is you get that dreaded phone call from the client saying, hey, I've been waiting for a copy of my immigration application. I assume you guys filed it. You said you were going to do it last week. But in reality, that dropped off of the associate attorney's radar, and in turn it dropped off of mine because once I gave it off to him, I did not track it any further. And so that can create lots of problems. So by having a task management system, I can now go in and look, and I can filter by either who it was assigned to, or I can filter by who it was assigned by. So now I'm pulling up a list of what did I assign to other users, or what did I assign to this particular user. So we can pull up those kind of lists and I can remind myself, okay, these are all of the things that I assigned to this particular person. And being able to track that can absolutely prevent malpractice. A lot of things that fall through cracks can be tracked in this way and can prevent malpractice. At the worst, can prevent unhappy clients at the least. So definitely something that I would encourage you guys to do. And a practice management software is going to help you do that, obviously. So let's look at the second way we're using tasks. Obviously, it's great to be able to track things, but even better if we can start that anticipation that I talked about earlier, and we can set ourselves up to be that proactive law firm. Then the way that we're going to do that is by building out what Clio calls task lists and other software calls workflows. basically it is a templated list of things that need to be done. So I'm going to go ahead and switch over to show you some of these lists as an example. So here in Clio, I've created a number of task lists, and let's start with this real estate transaction. So here, whenever I'm representing the seller in a real estate transaction, I'm going to take this list of tasks and I'm going to put it in that matter. So I've opened up the Smith file for their sale. I'm going to go ahead and drop this list in there, and it's going to automatically know who to assign that task to and when. So these are the things that drive that case forward. First, I'm going to add our contacts and our deadlines to Clio. Then I'm going to call up the lender for a financing update. I'm going to order a title search. These are all the steps I'm taking. But when we're working with maybe people that haven't done as much real estate, or people new to the practice area, or just haven't been doing it for 30 years, then they may not know the next steps, or they may not always be anticipating them. And for me to have to always be the person to say, okay, next on this case, we're going to do this. Next on this case, we're going to do that. That can be an overwhelming task for me. So instead, if I have a list of things that are constantly pushing that case ahead, as soon as we get that lender financing, it's going to pop up to order that title search, then I don't have to be the one always reminding the assistant or the paralegal or the associate attorney, this is the next step in this case. Now, when I talk to law firms about this, I get a lot of pushback sometimes about the idea that each case is different. Now, obviously, real estate transaction might be more systematic, if you will. We do the same steps every time. What is not so systematic is if we have, a litigation situation. So, for example, in this case, we're looking at a family law situation, and you're absolutely right. Litigation is not as one-tracked as a transaction, right? So the transactional work, whether we're looking at real estate, immigration, that estate planning, that kind of stuff is much easier to map out because it typically takes one direction or one or two directions. However, when we're dealing with litigation, as you know, things can change at a moment's notice. They can take different, whether a motion gets agreed to or whether a motion is denied, that can change the whole course of our litigation and the whole path that we're going to take. And so when we're talking about litigation and creating these workflows or creating these task lists, they can be a little bit more complex. But the reality is that it can still be created in a workflow. And I know this because when you're training someone to do a motion to dismiss, you are training them to take the same 5, 6, 7, 8 steps every time. And when we have a motion to dismiss, we're always going to want to do those steps. This is why checklists are so popular in law firms, because these are the things that keep us on track and keep us from forgetting things or leaving things out. So in litigation, we're looking at smaller lists. This list may not last the entire case. We may have one smaller list for motion to dismiss. We may have one smaller list for discovery, because in discovery, we're always going to be preparing interrogatories. We're always going to be preparing requests to produce. So these are the things that we do every time. So we may have a smaller list for preparing a complaint, the 10 steps we do when we prepare a complaint. We may have a smaller list for when we have a motion to dismiss. We may have a smaller list for each different scenario may have a list. And there may be scenarios that don't have lists because you've never dealt with them before, or you only deal with them once a year, once every 5 years. That's fine. We want to start by creating lists for the things that we handle the most often. So for example, if I'm an immigration firm, I'm going to want to take my, the top 5 types of applications that I'm always doing and create lists for those. By the way, as a hint, some of those may be very similar. So take a look at the practice areas that you're currently doing the most of and start there. Start with the most common scenarios. And then once you've built out the most common scenarios, start building out the second most common scenarios. And the key to making a good task list is, first of all, I would not recommend starting with it in the software. Just take a piece of paper, take a Word document. If you're into Excel, we'll talk about that in a minute, take an Excel sheet. But just start with who's going to do what by when. And that's the key, who, what, and when. Once we list those things for a motion to dismiss or a complaint, now we can start putting them into the practice management software. So those are the first steps that we take in building our task lists or our workflows. We want to make sure that we're indicating who's doing what by when, and then we're going to put those into a list. And again, with litigation, it may be smaller lists. Transactional, it may be longer lists because it follows more of a pattern. What this is going to do, by the way, when you're making these lists, make sure to include steps that we're going to take in communicating with our client so that we can have very consistent communication with our client. Anytime this happens, send out this status email to the client. Anytime this happens, email the or call the client and give them this update. Anytime this happens, make sure to call the client and discuss this with them. So we build that into our task lists or workflows, and that's what's going to keep the clients informed, keep them up to date so they don't feel like they have to make these panicked calls to your office and not know what's going on. So build those into your task lists. So task lists and workflows are absolutely the thing that is going to keep the firm proactive and keep you moving ahead, because now you as the managing attorney are no longer the logjam in getting stuff done. You're no longer the logjam in people needing to know what to do next. It's all written out. And in fact, you're going to not only use those task lists, but you're going to revise them for particular cases. So if I have a consult and my client comes in and we build out what we're going to do and my task list looks a little different, I'm going to drop it in the case and I'm going to start editing it so that even 6 months from now, when we get to the end of the case and we're going to do something a little different, I don't have to go back to my notes and remember or figure it out or forget, and worse yet, have the client remind me. That plan is all built out into the task list. I'm going to revise it as necessary for each case as needed. So make sure that you're using tasks in general and task lists specifically to keep that case moving forward and make sure that everyone knows what they're supposed to be doing next. By the way, this will also make those meetings a lot shorter, the meetings where you're reviewing your cases. I remember we would try to review in real estate, of course, your cases, you have them for about 30 days. And so if we were only reviewing them once a month, that wasn't going to cut it. We did a case review every week of every file that we had. And when we started that process, those meetings took forever. It was hours we would be sitting there talking about these different cases. As we got more used to this task system and the task lists, it was no longer an hour-long meeting. It was a quick pull it up on the screen, see where we're at, make sure there's no red flags, and move on. Because we knew that the list was in there to guide us as to what needed to be done and at what point. So definitely, this system is going to allow those meetings to be significantly shorter because all of the information is right there as to what has been done and what needs to be done. So, tasks, absolutely, absolutely something that I would recommend you taking advantage of. Before we move on to our last area, I wanted to make sure that you guys saw the question and answer box. You're welcome to, of course, put in any questions that you may have as we go along. If we don't get to them, we have about 15 more minutes here. We're going to wrap up. If we don't get to them, we'll be sure to address them either via email or a phone call after the fact. So I want to go ahead and move on so that we don't run out of time to our third area, which is also something that I'm very passionate about. I may have alluded to a minute ago, I may have alluded to it a minute ago when I talked about Excel. So the last area is managing your caseload. And I find it fascinating that the software itself is called practice management software. However, I will tell you that the more law firms that I work with, I am discovering more and more people are actually managing their cases on an Excel spreadsheet, even if they have the software. Because it's not, and in all fairness, it's not always obvious how to do it. Sometimes it seems a lot simpler if you don't know the software to be able to just make a list in Excel and say, here's my case, here's the status. Here's my case, here's the status. Or here's my case, here's the deadline. Here's my case, here's the deadline. The good news is that your practice management software absolutely is designed to be able to help you manage that and visualize that all in one place. It's unfortunately just not always as obvious. And so I want to show you how Clio does it, but then I also want to make you aware of how other software does it as well in case you're using something else or use something else in the future. And again, for me, this was one of the main reasons that I was even shopping for practice management software in the first place. I think Excel is a nice tool and has a time and a place, but I don't think tracking lawsuits is where it shines. And so when I started looking for practice management software, that was one of the main things I was looking for, is how can I see at a glance what I need to see in order to track these cases. And again, like I said, it's not always painfully obvious. It doesn't always show up like an Excel spreadsheet, so it can be a little trickier. But the reality is the software is built to do this. And so once you know how, it just opens up a world of opportunity in my experience. And you'll find yourself, or at least I did, starting to track things that you always wanted to track but never got to because of the idea that you weren't quite sure how to do it in the software. And so things like, how many cases do I have with married people as opposed to divorced people? How many cases do I have that I've been working on for more than a month? How many cases do I have, or a year? How many cases do I have that involve a will versus no will? Things like that can be really telling to your marketing department or to you as the marketing department, and can be very helpful to know. Those are the kind of things that aren't always obvious in the software but can be tracked. And so let's get on to an example here. Again, thanks so much for those questions coming in. These are some awesome questions that we'll try to either get to at the end or address individually with you if we don't get to them. So I'm going to show you an example. In Clio, we click on Matters and it shows us a list of all of our cases. And so we can use this column section here to tell the software what we want to see on the screen. So for example, I want to see the name of the matter. I want to see who my client is. I want to see who's responsible for that. I want to see what practice area it is. And that's about it. I don't care about the rest of that right now. So I can update this screen, and that's exactly what's going to show me. It's going to show me the name of the matter, who the client is, the responsible attorney is, and what the practice area is. And so we have a lot of information here that's on our screen. Now, the next thing I can do is I can go ahead and select a custom field. So for example, I've made custom fields for the date of the contract in case I'm doing some real estate, or maybe I want to look at the date of separation if I'm doing some family law. And so these are things that I can now update the screen to show. And so now I can see the name of the matter. I can see the name of the client. I don't know if you have to scroll over on your screen depending on how it's showing up. But I can see the practice area. I can see the date of the contract. I can see a lot of information that I want. Let's see, I don't care about that so much, or that. So we can basically designed this screen to show us whatever we want. So we've got the date of the contract, we've got the open date, we've got all kinds of information here. And which is super nice. The date of separation is kind of hanging off the edge here. But now what I can do is I can quickly look down my cases and see, okay, what cases do we have with the date of separation in December, or in 2017? Like, these are the kind of things that I want to know when I'm looking at my cases. And so it really can be helpful. If we put deadlines in a custom field, we could, see the different deadlines on the case. If we wanted to put the latest status on a case in a custom field, we could see that on this screen. So it really does help me to see everything I want to see. But better yet, I can also filter. So I can filter by a custom field and only see the cases that have, I'm trying to think of a good example with the sample data that I have in here. But let's say the purchase price. And so if I want a purchase price of more than $250,000, then I can filter my list by that, okay? And of course, I only have one case here, but the idea is that I can manipulate this data and this screen to show me exactly the information that I want. And so I can pretty much recreate my Excel spreadsheet here to show me the different custom fields that I want and the different information that's going to be helpful to me. Now, if you are using a different, let me go ahead and stop that. If you are using a different software, pretty much most of the software out there these days can do the same thing. They just may call it something different or may use different techniques. So for example, a lot of them out there these days will use what they call tags, right? So you can tag all your cases with whether they have children or they don't have children. You can tag them whether they are above $250,000 or below $250,000. Whatever data you think is going to be helpful, you can create those fields or those tags to help you track that in your practice management software. And then you can either see screens like the one we just looked at to see it online, or create reports that will give you that information. Your practice management software has a lot of detail in it, or can have a lot of detail in it. You just have to know how to get it out. And so I hope that these are 3 things that you feel very comfortable in trying out and see the benefit that they're going to give to you and changing the way that you practice law. If you're having trouble seeing that, absolutely reach out. I'm more than happy to talk about it. These are things that I'm super excited about. If I just sat here all day and talked about these things, it would be very enlightening for me, or very gratifying for me. Hopefully enlightening for you, but I understand it's not everyone's jam, and that's fine too. But I want to, before we wrap up here, say thank you for coming, but also, as promised at the beginning, I want to offer you guys something that I think will be of great value, and that is a 30-minute strategy session with me in order to talk through some of these issues. Now, 30 minutes isn't going to be able to give us a plan for the whole firm, but it's definitely going to give us some time to delve into your current situation and what you're currently doing and what your goals are, where you want to be, how you want your practice to run. Because what our specialty is building out a plan to get you there and figuring out what tools and how they're best used to get you there. So I will send you, after our presentation ends, I will send you an email with a link that you're more than welcome to use and schedule your free 30-minute strategy session to talk to us about how you're currently doing things. Let us know how that scorecard went. How did you score? Did you score less than 30? You need some help. If you're in the 30 to 60 range, then you're on the right track. There's some things that you might be working on, but there's a lot of room to grow. And of course, the 60 to 90 range, you've got some stuff figured out, but let's talk about automation. Let's talk about the super fun stuff that comes after we have these foundations and these basics set up. So reach out to us, please. Please do feel free to click on that link and schedule your 30-minute strategy session so that we can talk more about your results and talk more about basically, how we're going to get you there, because I'm super excited for every firm to have the kind of transformation that my firm did and to be able to practice in a way that's far, far less stressful. So thank you so much for your time this afternoon. It's been a pleasure working with you guys. I'm going to go ahead and we didn't have time to get to those questions, but I'll go ahead and address them individually. So please feel free to reach out. Have a great afternoon, guys.